Hey everyone, it's Alexander the Real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. Happy October. It is the month of Halloween, which means it's time for another set of horror movie reviews. So back in 2018, I reviewed all of the Halloween sequels in prep for the Blumhouse movie that came out that year. So this year I decided to tackle another major horror franchise, Friday the 13th. I'll be reviewing all of the sequels and the 2009 remake in honor of the franchise's 40th anniversary. Without further ado, let's get this series started. And of course, it's only natural for me to start this series by talking about Friday the 13th Part 2, which came out in 1981, just a year after the original, and is directed by Steve Miner. Now, if you're a brand new subscriber to the channel, first of all, welcome. Second of all, you might be wondering why I'm skipping over the original Friday the 13th. Well, that's because I've already reviewed that movie in 2016. You can check out the original review right here, but basically, it's a fine slasher movie. It's nothing too spectacular. It's not that original of a slasher movie, and outside of a few memorable kills and the film's ending, there's nothing about this that really is all that special. It's pretty much the most famous knockoff of Halloween out there, to the point where the creators even admitted that it's a knockoff of Halloween. But I do have to admire the movie for pretty much kicking off the entire Friday the 13th series and really kicking the slasher genre into full gear just as much as Halloween did. But as a movie on its own, it's just okay. It's not really all that good. And Part 2 is essentially the same movie, except this time Jason is the killer. It pretty much takes place 5 years after the first movie, where a bunch of new counselors come into Camp Crystal Lake. They try to set up the camp before all the kids come in, but slowly they get killed off one after another by a mysterious figure, who, as I've said before, is Jason Voorhees. So because this movie is very identical to the original, that could either be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. And it really is a mix of both good and bad in this scenario. And if I'm going to be totally honest, I actually like Part 2 more than the original. I know that might sound controversial amongst Friday fans, but hey, that's how I feel. And honestly, it's not because Jason is the killer this time around. Some of the main reasons I like this movie more than the original come down to a few more memorable moments than the original, and honestly, a better lead this time around. The movie opens up with the main character from the last movie, Alice, played again by Adrienne King, as she's pretty much trying to recover from her traumatic experience on Crystal Lake. And she ends up getting killed off before the opening credits by Jason himself, simply because he wanted to get revenge for the death of his mother, which, hey, that's a pretty good motivation. But I honestly think it's kind of bold to bring in the main character of the first movie, and at a point where you think it's going to be a continuing story with her, no, you just kill her off right there. And in place of Alice, we have Ginny, played by Amy Steele. And this character is not super interesting, but I just find her to be more proactive and more charming than Alice was in the last movie. Alice just seemed pretty helpless and at times clueless in the original Friday the 13th. Ginny has a better personality in my opinion. She can handle her own, and the finale between her and Jason at the end of the film is more interesting than the one in the last Friday the 13th. And I know I'm probably angering Friday the 13th fans right now, but what can you do? And I honestly think there are a few more likable characters in this movie than there were in the original. You got this guy in a wheelchair, Mark. You've got this girl who is absolutely head over heels for Mark named Vicky. And the two of them are very charming, they're likable, and in the case of Mark, he gets the best death in the movie, which is honestly my favorite moment of the entire film. Well, maybe second favorite moment, where Jason swings a machete into Mark's face backwards, because if you actually pause in that scene, you'll see that the back of the machete is jammed into Mark's face rather than the front, so that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I think most people will be distracted by the hilarious scene that follows afterwards, where Mark, dead in his wheelchair, is pretty much rolling backwards down a flight of stairs that seem to come out of nowhere. And it's mean-spirited to laugh at the handicap, but there's something about that moment that just gets me every time. And I love how the series just seems to reuse that scene whenever they have to do a recap. It is just hilarious on all accounts. But unfortunately, that also leads to a problem that I have with these first few Friday the 13th. It's the fact that you have these absolutely ridiculous moments that fall into the category of comedy, and yet the rest of the movie tries to play it straight. It's a little bizarre, and you're just confused watching these earlier movies and wondering, wait, what tone are you guys trying to take? Are you guys trying to be a serious, straightforward horror movie? Because you have a lot of moments in these first few movies that are supposed to be terrifying or horrific, but some of the time, if not most of the time, they come across as hilarious. So I have no idea where you guys are going for it, and it ultimately makes these movies a mess. But getting back to the positives, those are the moments of the movie that I think are better than the original, and honestly, I do think the finale is better, because rather than it just being a slap fest or seeing Pamela Voorhees and Alice just wrestle on the beach of Crystal Lake, you have Ginny smashing chairs onto Jason Voorhees, you have her attacking him with a chainsaw like she's Leatherface, and the moment where Ginny hides in Jason's shack and puts on his mother's vest to fool him is where the ending really gets interesting for me. They establish early on that Ginny is studying child psychology, and with that little bit of setup, you can instantly believe that Ginny is playing mind games with Jason into tricking him that she is his mother. And it's honestly a lot more interesting than what happens in the original movie. Now, granted, there's no iconic moment where the villain is beheaded and the decapitated body just goes, "Curses!" Like, that's iconic in the original Friday the 13th. But the entire finale in part 2 is just more interesting to me. Now let's talk about Jason. It's common knowledge by this point, thanks to Scream mainly, that Mrs. Voorhees was the killer in the original and Jason first appears in this movie, but he's wearing a sack over his head, which I think is pretty interesting for anyone watching these movies for the first time or literally having no knowledge of the franchise, because if you watch this movie, you would never in a million years recognize that it's a Friday the 13th movie, because everyone recognizes Jason with the hockey mask. Jason is just one of those iconic slasher villains, and it's really weird to see this hillbilly with a sack over his head running around killing people. So that's an interesting angle for people watching this series for the first time who are familiar with this version of Jason. But that being said, the movie does kind of take the same approach to the kills and how it portrays the villain, where it's a lot of POV shots, it's a lot of mystery, and this time around, since it's Jason, I'm like, okay, I can kind of let it slide because we know theoretically it's Jason because they kind of set him up, especially with him killing Alice in the beginning of the movie, but it does lend into the film's problem of being the same as the original. It still has the same sluggish pace as the original, it has the same structure, and the actual end of the film after the shack sequence is pretty much ripping off the original Friday the 13th movie, where you think everything's fine, everything's good, it's all peaceful, and then there's suddenly a jump scare where Jason attacks our final girl, but you suddenly realize that it's a dream sequence. And I'm just sitting there going, you couldn't come up with anything more original, really? So there's really not much to say about Friday the 13th Part 2. It's very much the original movie done over again. I think it's a little better, like I said beforehand. There are a few likable characters this time around. There's some cool deaths, especially with the wheelchair death. And I think the ending's a lot better than the original. But that being said, it still follows the same structure. It has the same sluggish pace. Most of the other characters are downright forgettable. But they're never to the point where anyone's unlikable. They're just bland. So I'd say watch at your own risk. If you're starting to get into horror movies and you want to get into the Friday the 13th series, I think this is an interesting entry to watch. Just don't expect anything groundbreaking. But for anyone else out there, I just don't highly recommend it. And there you go, that's my review for Friday the 13th Part 2. From here on out, I'm going to be reviewing all of the other movies every Friday and Monday. So tune in this Friday where I'll be talking about the next film in the series, Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. I won't be in 3D, it's just the movie was presented in 3D when it came out. But first, I want to hear what you guys think about the movie. If you've seen it, what did you think? Between the first Friday the 13th and the second one, which one of these is your favorite? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the Real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.